Good morning, and welcome to another Thursday. This is the rough and the perfect ashlar of Masonry. This cool little souvenir was given out by the Grand Commander during the Scottish Rite Has Masonry Talent Contest in Washington, D.C., where I sang a couple years ago, yeah. But anyway, we're going to talk about the rough and the perfect ashlar in today's 7 Secrets of Masonry. Or excuse me, 7 Secrets of Solomon. And it has a very cool looking device in the front of it, and a wonderful photograph taken by my friend, my longtime friend, James Wasserman, of Albert Pike's statue in Washington, D.C., which unfortunately, because of his involvement in the Confederacy, was knocked down recently. His statue wasn't up because he was a Confederate. His statue was up because he was a great Mason. It starts with an epigram from Albert Pike. The Hermetic science of the early Christian age, cultivated also by the Arabs, studied by the chiefs of the Templars, and embodied in certain symbols of the higher degrees of Freemasonry, may be accurately defined as the Kabbalah in active realization, or the magic of works. Albert Pike. The epigram above was written by Albert Pike, 1809 to 1891, arguably the most eminent and influential Masonic scholar and leader of all time. As I near the conclusion of this section of my little book, I cannot imagine a more concise distillation of what I wish to communicate by writing it. In one breath, Pike manages to link Christianity, Arab scholars, the Templars, Freemasonry, Kabbalah, and magic. His words also afford me the opportunity to touch briefly on one vitally important and fundamental axiom in the spiritual science called Hermeticism. Some Masons believe that Freemasonry is the modern incarnation of Western Hermeticism, that the Templars were influenced by Hermetic philosophy and engaged in magical practices based upon Hermetic principles. We could argue ad infinitum whether or not there is any truth to these speculations, and at the end of the day still not come to a satisfactory resolution. For our purposes, let us be content with what Brother Albert Mackey wrote in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Quote, Hermetic science, the art or science of alchemy, so termed from Hermes Trismegistus, who was looked up to by the alchemists as the founder of their art. Hermetic philosophers say that all the sages of antiquity, such as Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and Pythagoras, were initiated into the secrets of their science, and that the hieroglyphics of Egypt and all the fables of mythology were invented to teach the dogmas of Hermetic philosophy. Unquote. The Hermetic tradition informs us that the first revelation of God to man was the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. It was said to have been over 2,000 years old at the time of Christ. It was reportedly cast in liquid emerald by alchemical means, and the letters were raised in bas-relief rather than being chiseled into stone. Most authorities naturally dismiss the historic veracity of the legend. But whatever its origin, the text stands as a consummate distillation of Hermetic thought, outlining the alchemical process that transmutes lead into gold and you and I into gods. The document is only 13 short paragraphs in length and opens with the statement, quote, "It is true, and no lie, certain, and to be depended upon, that the superior agrees with the inferior, and the inferior with the superior, to effect that one truly wonderful work." Unquote. These words reveal the cosmos to be a hierarchy of repeating patterns. Like the keys of a piano, the notes that comprise the octaves of the world above have their direct counterparts in and vibrate sympathetically with the octaves of the worlds below. The superior agrees with the inferior, as above, so below. I'm going to use that phrase a lot in this chapter, so I hope you've gotten a pretty good grasp of the concept. Armed with this knowledge, one becomes, in the truest sense of the term, a magician, a Solomon, a person who can effect positive life changes in conformity to his or her enlightened will. It's as simple as that. However, that's more easily said than done. And there are a few things we must also keep in mind in order to make as above, so below actually work for us. These I presumptuously call the 7 secrets of Solomon. They are secrets of magic, yes, but they are also secrets of Masonry. For through her rituals, traditions, and teachings, the ancient craft of Freemasonry conveys these same secrets to anyone who has the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Are you ready? These are the 7 secrets of Solomon. Solomon's secret number 1. The individual is the fundamental unit. I know this doesn't sound much like a mystical secret, but it's a very big one. If you can't swallow this, you'll never be a magician. We are, each one of us, our own self-contained King Solomon. We are suns, not planets. Atoms, not molecules. Kings and queens, not subjects. The fundamental unit of society is not the family, not the community, not the nation, not the church, but you and I. Until we come to the full realization of this fundamental truth, we remain like the unenlightened crusaders, fighting and dying for someone else's absurd fantasy cause. Slaves to arbitrary and impersonal outside entities, unable to recognize, let alone fulfill, our human potential. This profound yet unassuming secret is expressed in Freemasonry by the simple admonition that we must first improve and perfect ourselves as individuals, so better to understand and assist our families, our communities, and our nations. Solomon's secret number 2. Human beings are inherently good. As we learned in chapter 10, This is where we come toe to toe with the doctrines of original sin and the total depravity of man. While it's true that humans are capable of harboring the most vile and hideous thoughts, and that our fellows continue to plague the world with bloody orgies of pain and death and genocide, it's not helpful. It's not healthful. Indeed, it's not logical for us to focus on these manifestations of evil and assume they represent our true spiritual nature. As a soldier, Francis of Assisi was a playboy and a thief. Young Mohandas Gandhi slapped his wife around. Were these their essential natures? We are all potential saints and Mahatmas. And if we can't wake up to the fact that deep down inside we are good, then we deserve to remain asleep, dreaming we are evil. Masonry teaches that a fund of science and industry is implanted in man for the best, most salutary, and most beneficent purposes. In the third degree, we are told, quote, "Retain, we entreat you, that goodness of heart, that purity of intention, and that love of virtue of what we think you now possess." Unquote. Truly realizing that we are inherently good rather than inherently evil is not only a fundamental fact in our sense of self-identity, it serves throughout our lives as a perpetual background meditation that positively affects our actions, behavior, aspirations, and most importantly, our dreams. Solomon's secret number 3. Human beings evolve and with intent can accelerate the evolutionary process. This secret has been the foundation for the spiritual practices of the East for millennia, but in the West it's been successfully suppressed by religious doctrine and cultural interest since the 5th century CE. One would think that at the dawn of the 21st century, such an obvious fact of life should be exempt from secrethood. However, one glance at the headlines of today's newspapers and we become embarrassingly disabused. The so-called debate between the theories of evolution and creationism, currently doing business under the name of intelligent design, is an obvious extension of the argument between those who insist on the empirical or even scientific historicity of the Old Testament and those who recognize and accept the archaeological and critical scholarly evidence. The irony of this debate, as we'll see in Solomon's secret number 4, is that true evolution and true intelligent design need not be mutually exclusive concepts. There will always be those who are willing to put their intellects and common sense on hold in order to feed some superstition or conform to some religious doctrine. That's their right. But for the rest of us, including those who are staunchly religious, our spiritual worldview is not turned upside down when we simply recognize the fact that human beings evolve and that we can, through our own efforts and intention, accelerate that process. Masonry, in her characteristically understated way, exemplifies this once and this once radical and anti-clerical attitude in metaphor by discussing the symbols of the rough and perfect ashlar. Every lodge is furnished with 2 stones, one roughly cut but basically cubical, another smoothly cut and perfectly squared and cubical. The candidate is informed in the apprentice degree, quote, "By the rough ashlar we are reminded of our rude and imperfect state by nature. By the perfect ashlar of that state of perfection at which we hope to arrive by virtuous education, our own endeavors, and the blessing of God." Unquote. Solomon's Secret number 4. All is consciousness. In the 3rd degree, Master Masons are informed, quote, "It is the inspiration of that great divinity whom we adore, and bears the nearest resemblance of affinity to that supreme intelligence which pervades all nature and which will never, never, never die." Unquote. Even as I write, advances in human thought are melding quantum physics with ancient mysticism. One word that each of them are using when discussing the ultimate nature of reality is, quote, consciousness. In the highly acclaimed film, What the Bleep Do We Know? Remember that? Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was quoted, quote, "Consciousness is the basis of all life and the field of all possibilities. Its nature is to expand and unfold its full potential. The impulse to evolve is thus inherent in the very nature of life." Deepak Chopra cuts right to the chase and just says in no uncertain terms, good is higher consciousness, evil is lower consciousness. Consciousness viewed in its supreme totality could be considered the mind of God. Indeed, if proponents of the so-called theory of intelligent design could for a moment unburden themselves with ulterior agendas, they might hasten to embrace the quantum theory by quoting the Nobel Prize-winning father of quantum physics, Max Planck, who shocked everyone in the 1950s by saying, quote, "There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." Unquote. All things we perceive in the cosmos, including ourselves, are aspects of consciousness within the matrix of matter. From our limited vantage point, we are only aware of the reality of our immediate neighborhood. We can't see the big consciousness picture. Some of us, however, sense there is more. Like the ancient Hermeticists, we are drawn to speculate about existence of levels of consciousness both above and below our own. Deepak Chopra's comment that good is higher consciousness and evil is lower consciousness is profoundly true from a moral point of view, but we can also view this hierarchy of consciousness in the way the ancient Kabbalists and magicians did. Not as abstractions, but as spiritual beings. Solomon's secret number 5. Deity, archangels, angels, intelligence, spirits, demons, you and I are personifications of a hierarchy of consciousness. Deity is obviously at the top of the hierarchy of consciousness, the supreme consciousness, the supreme being. All creation is a play in the mind of God. Next lower in the hierarchy is the descending array of forces, energies that are more specialized envoys of intelligence in the mind of God. We could view them as units or aspects of natural force and laws. The ancients personified them as spiritual beings, calling them archangels, angels, and intelligences. We don't actually see these forces or entities, but we certainly are aware of how they affect the world around us. For example, we could personify the law of gravity as the great archangel. We could even give this archangel a name, Gravitiel. Gravitiel is the spiritual being with huge duties and responsibilities in the universe. As an archangel, it embodies all that is gravitational. We seek the work of we see the work of gravity manifest in almost infinite ways. The tugging of the tidal moon, the falling of a raindrop, the sagging of a breast, the plummeting of a meteor. These specific expressions of gravity could be viewed as angels working under the archangel gravity. Tugael, Falael, Sagiel, Plummetiel, or Slip or Slideiel, or Droop. All of them working under the authority of the archangel Gravitiel. Gravitiel and his angels are responsible for organizing and directing all the work that takes place in the next lowest level of consciousness, where the process of creating, sustaining, and destroying the material universe takes place. This is the world most of us consider objective reality. Magicians, however, have a more colorful name. They call it the infernal regions. If you can suffer one more of my metaphoric excursions, let's look at God as the owner, a boss of a cosmic company. Archangels, angels, and intelligences are middle management. The workers themselves are spirits and demons that dwell on the factory floor, the lowest level of consciousness. These workers do all the heavy lifting in the universe, and they're a pretty rough bunch. After all, they're not only the cosmic construction crew, they're the cosmic wrecking crew. This far down the scale of consciousness, the purity of the upper levels has become fragmented and disorganized. If this area is not consciously directed by middle management, these broken pieces of the mind of God will, like brutish and restless mob of unemployed and unsupervised zombie workmen, discharge their awesome energy in chaotic and destructive ways. On the other hand, once controlled by higher intelligence, they become united in service to the company. If they continue to behave themselves, they eventually are promoted to middle management themselves. The characters in the Masonic story of Solomon personifies this spectrum of consciousness. God is at the top, the great architect of the universe. Solomon and his fellow Grand Masters, King Hiram of Tyre and Hiram Abiff, in the middle. And at the bottom, the workmen of the temple. Masters or overseers of the work, fellow crafts or hewers on the mountains and in the quarries, entered apprentices or bearers of burdens. If the entered apprentice works diligently, he could be expected to be advanced to fellowcraft, etc. Once in place and functioning, this scenario paints a picture of a universe in balance, a spiritual utopia where everyone is laboring successfully under the direction and supervision to raise themselves and their inferiors to the next higher level. Quote. This is from the Master's Lecture, 3rd degree. These were all so classed and arranged by the wisdom of Solomon that neither envy, discord, nor confusion was suffered to interrupt or disturb the peace and good fellowship which prevailed among the workmen. Unquote. But where do you and I fit in this cosmic company of consciousness? It depends on where our present level of consciousness positions us. In our unenlightened state, we've convinced ourselves that we're infernal creatures living and dying on the factory floor. Once we open our eyes, however, we discover that we're relatively high on the hierarchy of spiritual beings. In fact, we are, each one of us, the most important member of the middle management team, envied by the angels and feared by the spirits and demons. We are Solomon. Solomon's secret number 6. It is our duty to master and redirect the lower forces to constructive ends. Spiritual evolution does not occur in a vacuum. Our consciousness is raised because vibratory room has been made above to accommodate it. We are promoted to boss when our boss is promoted to a bigger boss. As above, so below. With authority comes responsibility, just like Spider-Man's uncle told him. It's true. Once awakened to our true spiritual status, we realize that we're actually in charge of a roughneck crew of demons, aspects of our lower nature of consciousness. Unless we immediately demonstrate who's the boss and get these guys busy working on our temple, they will soon gain the upper hand and return to running amok at our expense. This secret is innocuously revealed to the newly raised Master Mason when he is told, quote, "As a Master Mason, you are authorized to correct the irregularities of your less informed brethren, to fortify their minds with resolution against the snares of the insidious, and to guard them against every allurement to vicious practices." Unquote. His completed temple is the microscopic replica of the in stone of the deity itself, fashioned so perfectly it reflects the macrocosmic perfection of God. And I'm reminded of the perfect ashlar of Kabbalah, representing the macrocosm. Finally, I just threw that in. Solomon's secret number 7, and that's where we'll end today. As we are raised, so must we raise. In the previous chapter, I wrote that as long as the magician remains plugged in to that which is above, he or she is simultaneously plugged in and must begin to master that which is below. The 7th secret of Solomon adds that not only is it our duty to master and direct the spirits beneath us, we must also, as we advance, make sure they advance as well. It does us no good to raise our own status if we are unwilling to raise the status of those beneath us. In fact, failure to do so immediately disconnects us from the source and unplugs us from the magical circuitry of the cosmos. The great 19th century magician Eliphas Levi, wrote a marvelous little poem called The Magician that perfectly illustrates this greatest of Solomon's secrets. I can think of no better way to conclude this portion of the book and prepare you for what follows than quoting this short poem. The Magician. O Lord, deliver me from hell's great fear and gloom. Loose thou my spirit from the larvae of the tomb. I seek them in their dread abodes without affright. On them will I impose my will, the law of light. I bid the night conceive the glittering hemisphere. Arise, O sun, arise, O moon, shine white and clear. I seek them in their dread abodes without affright. On them will I impose my will, the law of light. Their faces and their shapes are terrible and strange. These devils, by my might to angels I will change. I seek them in their dread abodes without affright. On them will I impose my will, the law of light. These are phantoms, pale of mine astonished view, yet none but I their blasted beauty can renew. For to the abyss of hell I plunge without affright. On them I will impose my will, the law of light. And that's where we'll stop for today. Tomorrow will be chapter 14, The Lost Symbol. I know we went a little over our time today. I hope you, if you didn't get a chance to finish it all, that you'll replay it sometime later today, because this was one of my favorite chapters. So, go ahead and start your weekend early. Don't even wait till Friday. Continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.